Hello everyone, let me ask you something that might feel a little uncomfortable at first. When was the last time you looked at your partner and felt that spark, the kind that made you feel alive, desired, connected? Not the routine hug before work, not the polite kiss goodnight, but that moment when your whole body remembered why you fell in love. If you're pausing to think, you're not alone. So many couples, especially after years together, find themselves in this quiet distance. On the outside, everything looks fine. Bills are paid, children are cared for, conversations flow about schedules and responsibilities. But somewhere in between the daily grind, intimacy begins to fade. Not because the love is gone, but because something subtler, quieter, more dangerous has taken its place. I've sat with countless couples in my practice who whisper the same question: why aren't we close anymore? And the truth is rarely about sex itself. It's about what sex represents: desire, attention, presence. Aliveness. Intimacy doesn't disappear in one dramatic moment. It slips away slowly, hidden in unspoken words, in small resentments, in routines that numb instead of nurture. Today, we're going to talk about the number one reason couples stop being intimate. Not just the physical act, but the emotional closeness, the playfulness, the spark. Because when we understand this, we don't just rescue our sex lives, we rediscover the very heartbeat of our relationships. Let me ask you something that might feel a little uncomfortable at first. When was the last time you looked at your partner and felt that spark, the kind that made you feel alive, desired, connected? Not the routine hug before work, not the polite kiss goodnight, but that moment when your whole body remembered why you fell in love. If you're pausing to think, you're not alone. So many couples, especially after years together, find themselves in this quiet distance. On the outside, everything looks fine. Bills are paid, children are cared for, conversations flow about schedules and responsibilities. But somewhere in between the daily grind, intimacy begins to fade. Not because the love is gone, but because something subtler, quieter, more dangerous has taken its place. I've sat with countless couples in my practice who whisper the same question: why aren't we close anymore? And the truth is rarely about sex itself. It's about what sex represents: desire, attention, presence, aliveness. Intimacy doesn't disappear in one dramatic moment. It slips away slowly, hidden in unspoken words, in small resentments, in routines that numb instead of nurture. When couples stop being intimate, they often believe the issue is about physical attraction, or aging, or hormones. And yes, those things matter. But more often, the number one reason is much simpler and much more human. It is the slow erosion of curiosity and attention. The very things that once drew you together begin to fade when we assume we already know everything about our partner. Think about it. In the beginning, love is a mystery. You hang on every word. You wonder what the other is thinking. You lean in because you are discovering someone new. Desire thrives in that space of discovery. But with time, discovery gives way to certainty. You believe you already know what your partner will say, how they'll react, what they'll want. And slowly, without realizing it, curiosity is replaced by assumption. And where there is no curiosity, intimacy begins to wither. One of the most dangerous phrases in a long-term relationship is, "I already know you," because the moment you believe that, you stop looking. You stop asking questions. You stop seeing your partner as a changing, evolving person. You stop noticing the subtle shifts in their moods, their needs, their fantasies. And without noticing, without asking, without engaging, the closeness fades. I remember working with a couple who had been married for 18 years. On paper, they had it all: stable jobs, 2 children, a beautiful home. But their intimacy had collapsed. They told me, "We just don't feel that spark anymore." When I asked when they last truly asked each other a question, something deeper than, "Did you pay the bill?" or "What's for dinner?" they both sat in silence. It had been years. They weren't unkind to each other. They were simply living as co-managers of a household. Their relationship had become a partnership of efficiency, not intimacy. And this is where the trouble begins, because intimacy does not live in efficiency. Intimacy lives in the unnecessary, the playful, the surprising, the curious. It lives in the moment where you lean over and whisper something unexpected, or when you ask your partner how they're really feeling, not just in the general sense, but today, in this exact moment. For men especially, intimacy often gets confused with performance. Many men tell me that when they're not having sex, they feel rejected. They interpret the absence of physical intimacy as a failure of masculinity. But what they often don't realize is that for many women, intimacy is less about performance and more about presence. It's about feeling seen, not managed. It's about knowing that their partner is curious about them as a person, not just as a role. Think about how often your conversations revolve around logistics: who's picking up the kids, what needs fixing in the house when the bills are due. Necessary conversations, yes, but they do nothing to nurture desire. In fact, they slowly replace desire with duty, and desire cannot survive in duty. This is why I say the number one reason couples stop being intimate is not age or stress or biology. It's neglect, not intentional neglect, but the kind of neglect that comes from assuming intimacy will take care of itself. We imagine that love is self-sustaining, that once we've chosen each other, desire will remain on autopilot. But intimacy doesn't work that way. It requires active tending. It requires curiosity. It requires paying attention. Here's something to reflect on. When was the last time you asked your partner a question that had no practical purpose? When was the last time you looked at them not through the lens of daily life, but as if you were meeting them for the first time? What do they dream about now, 5, 10, 20 years into your relationship? What do they secretly wish for, but haven't said aloud? What parts of themselves have they hidden because they assume you're not interested anymore? The truth is, your partner is not the same person you married, and you are not the same person either. We are all constantly changing, our desires, our fears, our needs, our hopes. But if we stop noticing these changes, if we stop asking, then we fall into the illusion of sameness. And intimacy cannot survive in sameness. So the first step to rekindling intimacy is to bring back curiosity, to remember that your partner is not a finished book you've already read, but a story that is still being written. To dare to ask questions again, even if the answers surprise you, especially if the answers surprise you, because surprise is the lifeblood of desire. And here is the paradox. We crave both security and excitement in love. We want to know our partner is dependable, stable, trustworthy, but we also want them to feel mysterious, unpredictable, alive. And holding both of these needs, safety and surprise, is what makes intimacy thrive. If you've noticed intimacy slipping away in your relationship, don't just ask, how do we have more sex? Ask, how do we become curious about each other again? Because sex without curiosity is mechanical, but curiosity opens the door to play, to laughter, to exploration, and that is where intimacy is reborn. When we talk about the fading of intimacy, it's tempting to think it happens suddenly, as if one morning you wake up and the desire has vanished. But the truth is, intimacy rarely disappears in a dramatic collapse. More often, it slips away like water through your fingers, quietly, almost invisibly, until one day you realize you are lying next to someone you love deeply, but no longer feel close to. And one of the greatest culprits of this silent drift is routine. Routine is not bad in itself. After all, it gives us stability, structure, and predictability. But intimacy and desire do not thrive in predictability. They thrive in aliveness. And aliveness requires some measure of risk, uncertainty, and surprise. Think about how you start your day with your partner. Do you exchange a kiss that feels perfunctory, out of habit? Do you discuss schedules and responsibilities before you've even had your coffee? These small rituals, while practical, can easily become mechanical. When every day looks the same, when every interaction is predictable, the relationship begins to feel like a script you've rehearsed 1,000 times. There is comfort in that script, yes, but there is no spark. Now, routine alone would not be so dangerous if it weren't often accompanied by something far more corrosive: resentment. Resentment is the silent killer of intimacy, and the tragedy is it often goes unspoken. Here is how resentment usually works. One partner feels unseen or unappreciated. Perhaps she feels like she carries the emotional weight of the household, organizing, planning, worrying about the details that no one else notices. Or perhaps he feels that his efforts are taken for granted, that no matter how hard he works, it is never enough. These feelings don't always explode into arguments. Often they simmer quietly beneath the surface. And here's the thing about resentment, it doesn't just stay in the realm of logistics. It seeps into the bedroom, because it is almost impossible to desire someone you secretly feel angry at. It is almost impossible to be playful with someone you feel owes you. Desire cannot coexist with a running tab of grievances. I once worked with a couple where the wife told me, "Hey, always wants to be intimate, but I can't bring myself to say yes. I feel like if I give in, I am giving away another piece of myself." When we explored further, we discovered that it wasn't about sex at all. It was about years of unacknowledged effort, her caring for the children, managing the household, keeping things afloat, while her husband focused primarily on work. She didn't withhold intimacy because she lacked desire. She withheld because intimacy felt like yet another demand, another expectation placed upon her without recognition of all she already gave. For him, this was shocking. He thought her distance meant she no longer found him attractive. But her withdrawal was not about attraction. It was about emotional exhaustion. She didn't need more foreplay in the bedroom. She needed more partnership in life. And this is where so many couples misunderstand the loss of intimacy. They treat it as a problem of the bedroom, when in fact, it is often a reflection of what is happening outside the bedroom. Desire is not an isolated act. It is the echo of the entire relationship. If one partner feels invisible, unappreciated, or burdened, intimacy will be the first thing to vanish. Now, you might be wondering, if routine and resentment are such powerful forces, how do we protect ourselves from them? And the answer begins with recognition, because most couples don't even realize that these forces are at work. They think they're just tired or stressed or aging. They normalize the absence of intimacy as inevitable. But it isn't inevitable. It is preventable if we are willing to pay attention. The first antidote to routine is intentional novelty. Not novelty in the sense of constant adventure or expensive vacations, though those can help, but novelty in the sense of creating moments of unexpectedness. Sending a playful text in the middle of the day, changing the order of your rituals, asking your partner to share something they've never told you, surprising them with a small gesture that breaks the script. These moments don't have to be grand, but they have to be intentional, because intimacy does not survive autopilot. The antidote to resentment, however, is a little more demanding. It requires a willingness to speak the unsaid and to hear the unheard, to sit down with your partner and admit, I feel invisible when you don't notice what I do, or I feel unappreciated when my efforts go unacknowledged. And it requires the courage to listen without defensiveness, to recognize that these confessions are not attacks but invitations to deeper intimacy. Because here is the paradox: resentment builds when silence reigns. The very words we avoid saying, the grievances we bury, the disappointments we downplay, these are the seeds of distance. And the only way to uproot them is to bring them into the light gently, compassionately, without accusation. Now, some of you might be thinking, but we don't fight, we get along, we're fine. And yes, many couples pride themselves on not fighting. But let me tell you this, a couple that never fights is not always a healthy couple. Sometimes it is a couple that has learned to avoid conflict at the expense of intimacy. Because real intimacy requires honesty, and honesty sometimes creates friction. What matters is not the absence of conflict, but the way conflict is navigated. Do you fight to win, or do you fight to understand? Do you listen, or do you wait to respond? Do you approach disagreements with curiosity or with judgment? These choices determine whether conflict becomes a wall or a bridge. Let's go deeper for a moment. Many couples lose intimacy not because they lack love, but because they confuse love with caretaking. They become excellent at managing each other, reminding, correcting, suggesting, organizing, but they stop seducing each other. They stop flirting. They stop playing. They stop imagining each other outside the roles of spouse, parent, or provider. And this is where the slow death of intimacy happens, when the person you once saw as your lover becomes only your partner in logistics. You talk about responsibilities, but not about fantasies. You share space, but not imagination. You know their habits, but you no longer seek their mysteries. I often say that desire needs space, not physical space necessarily, but psychological space. The distance that allows us to see our partner as separate, as other, as someone we cannot fully possess or predict. When everything is routine, when everything is merged, when everything is known, that space collapses, and with it, desire collapses too. So the real question becomes, how do we reintroduce that space without threatening the safety of the relationship? How do we create an environment where both routine and novelty can coexist, where stability does not suffocate excitement? It begins with awareness, to notice where resentment has been quietly building, to recognize where routine has turned into autopilot, and then to make the smallest of shifts, asking a different question, breaking a pattern, daring to reveal something unsaid. Because the truth is, intimacy is not about grand gestures. It's about attention. It's about saying, I see you, not just as my partner in life, but as my lover, my mystery, my other. It's about remembering that the spark is not something we find. It is something we create. Intimacy fades not only in the silence of routine or the poison of resentment, but also in the things we dare not say, because at the heart of every relationship there are unspoken needs, longings, fierce fantasies that we hesitate to reveal. And it is in that hesitation, in that self-censorship, that intimacy slowly suffocates. Think about it. Most of us are far more comfortable talking about our schedules, our children, or even our politics than we are about what we deeply crave in love. We fear that if we expose these parts of ourselves, they might be met with rejection, or worse, indifference. So instead, we protect ourselves. We tuck away our longings. We swallow our disappointments. We pretend our needs are smaller than they really are. But here's the paradox. The very things we hide to protect the relationship are often the things that could revive it. Intimacy cannot exist where vulnerability is absent. To be intimate is to be seen fully, with all our messy contradictions and hidden desires. And when we stop offering that vulnerability, we may still live together. We may still love each other, but we are no longer truly intimate. I once spoke with a man who told me he longed for more tenderness from his wife, but he never asked for it. When I asked him why, he said, I don't want her to think I'm needy. And yet, his silence created a distance she could feel, even though she couldn't name it. She interpreted his withdrawal as disinterest, when in fact it was disappointment wrapped in pride. He withheld his need for affection in order to protect his masculinity, but in doing so, he unknowingly starved the intimacy they both craved. This is one of the most common dynamics I see. The fear of being too much or not enough silences us. We tell ourselves stories. If I admit what I want, they'll think I'm selfish. If I show my longing, they'll use it against me. If I reveal my fantasies, they'll judge me. And so instead of sharing, we bury. But buried needs do not disappear. They ferment. They turn into bitterness, distance, disconnection. For women, the silence often takes a different form. Many women tell me they hesitate to express their erotic desires, fearing they'll be misunderstood, or that their needs will clash with societal expectations of being the good wife or the good mother. They censor themselves, believing that safety and stability must come at the cost of passion. But passion thrives not in silence, but in honesty. And here lies the fragility of desire. It requires exposure. It requires risk. To say, I want this, is to risk rejection. To say, I miss being touched like that, is to risk conflict. To say, I feel lonely even when I'm with you, is to risk heartbreak. But without these risks, we are left with polite coexistence rather than passionate connection. Many couples believe that by avoiding difficult conversations, they are protecting the harmony of the relationship. But harmony without honesty is an illusion. True intimacy is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of truth. It is the courage to bring our hidden selves into the light, even when it feels uncomfortable. And here's something important: intimacy is not only about physical closeness, it is about emotional nakedness. We often think that to be intimate is to undress in front of someone. But real intimacy is undressing the soul. It is allowing another person to see the parts of us we usually keep hidden: our fears of aging, our insecurities about our bodies, our doubts about love, our fantasies that break the mold of routine. When we stop sharing these parts, the relationship becomes safe, yes, but sterile. We may still touch each other, but we no longer reach each other. And this is why so many couples stop being intimate, not because the love is gone, but because the vulnerability is gone. Now, vulnerability is terrifying for many people, especially for men who were taught that strength means invulnerability. But I want to tell you this: vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is erotic. Vulnerability is magnetic. Because to reveal yourself, to take that risk, is to say to your partner, I trust you with the most delicate parts of me. And trust is the soil from which desire grows. Let me share another story. A woman once told me, I wish he would tell me what he's afraid of. Not just the practical fears, but the deep ones. I don't need him to be perfect. I need him to be human. Her husband, on the other hand, thought she wanted him to be stoic, always composed, always strong. He believed intimacy required him to hide his cracks, when in reality, intimacy required him to reveal them. Once he allowed himself to say, I'm scared of losing you, I'm scared of not being enough, she felt closer to him than she had in years. Not because the fears were pleasant, but because they were real. This is the paradox of intimacy. We fall in love with each other's strengths, but we connect through each other's weaknesses. The polished version of you may impress your partner, but it is your unpolished, unguarded self that will make them feel truly bonded to you. So if intimacy has faded in your relationship, ask yourself, what am I not saying? What am I withholding out of fear, pride, or habit? What part of me longs to be seen, but hasn't had the courage to step forward? Because often, the distance is not caused by what has been said, but by what has been left unsaid. And when you dare to bring those parts into the open, something powerful happens. Your partner begins to see you anew, not just as the reliable spouse or the responsible parent, but as a human being with depth, with longing, with complexity. And that is where desire lives. Desire lives in the tension between what is known and what is still mysterious. So the key is not only to express your needs, but to create a space where your partner feels safe to express theirs, to ask questions without judgment, to listen without rushing to fix, to respond with curiosity instead of fear. Because when both partners feel they can bring their whole selves into the relationship, intimacy is not just restored, it is deepened. Remember, this intimacy is not about knowing everything about each other. It is about being willing to keep discovering. And that discovery begins the moment you allow yourself to be vulnerable. One of the most subtle yet powerful reasons couples stop being intimate is that they forget how to be lovers. They remember how to be parents. They remember how to be providers. They remember how to be caretakers and managers of life. But somewhere along the way, they lose the identity of lover. In the early days of love, the lover role is effortless. It's playful, light, spontaneous. You look at your partner and you don't see the parent of your children or the one who handles the mortgage. You see someone magnetic, someone who awakens parts of you didn't even know were there. You flirt, you tease, you explore, but with time other roles begin to take center stage. Life is demanding, children arrive, careers evolve, families need attention, finances need stability. And slowly, the lover steps aside to make room for the manager, the planner, the parent, the responsible adult. And there's nothing wrong with those roles. They are necessary, they are noble, but they are not erotic. I remember a couple who came to me after 15 years together. They had 3 children, a busy household, and they confessed that their sex life had practically disappeared. We love each other, they said, but we don't feel attracted to each other anymore. When I asked them to describe how they saw each other on a daily basis, the wife said, he's a wonderful father. The husband said, she's an amazing mom. Beautiful compliments, yes, but not the language of lovers. Because here is the truth: we cannot desire the person we only see as responsible. We cannot long for the person who is always practical. Desire requires a different lens, one that sees the partner not just as dependable, but as desirable. And this is the paradox of long-term love. The very qualities that make a partner dependable, reliability, stability, predictability, are often the very qualities that dampen eroticism. We crave security, but security alone does not ignite passion. Passion thrives in the unknown, in the unpredictable, in the playful. When you look at your partner, do you only see them in their role? Do you see the parent of your children, the financial partner, the roommate who helps you manage life? Or do you still see the person who once gave you butterflies, who once surprised you with a glance, who once stirred your imagination? What many couples don't realize is that intimacy suffers when the lover identity disappears, when you stop flirting, when you stop dressing for each other, when you stop allowing yourself to see your partner as someone other people might also find attractive. Because let me tell you something, it's not only normal, but healthy to remember that your partner is desired by the world. It keeps you from falling into the trap of taking them for granted. The problem is, we live in a culture that glorifies productivity over pleasure. We value the parent who sacrifices, the worker who provides, the partner who manages, but we rarely celebrate the lovers who keep play alive. And so couples often feel guilty for prioritizing pleasure. They think, we can't afford a night out. We can't take time away from the kids. We can't step away from responsibilities. But when you neglect the lover, you are not protecting the family. You are weakening its very foundation. Children don't just need parents. They need to see parents who desire each other. Families don't just need stability. They need vitality. And couples don't just need to manage life together. They need to feel alive together. So how do we revive the lover identity when life feels heavy with responsibilities? It begins with a choice. A choice to see your partner not just in their roles, but as a lover, to cultivate eroticism in the midst of everyday life. Sometimes that means intentionally shifting out of the parent role when the children go to bed. Sometimes it means carving out a night where you don't talk about logistics at all. Sometimes it means putting effort into how you present yourself, not for work, not for the world, but for your partner. Desire doesn't thrive on effortlessness, it thrives on intentionality. And here is something crucial: being lovers is not only about sex, it is about attitude, it is about play. It is about treating your partner not as a project to manage, but as a mystery to engage. It is about bringing curiosity, playfulness, and even risk back into the relationship. I once asked a couple, when was the last time you flirted with each other? They looked at me, puzzled. Flirt? They asked, as if it were a foreign language. We don't flirt. We're married, but marriage should not be the death of flirting. It should be its playground. Flirting reminds us that attraction is not automatic, it is cultivated. And flirting is not only about words. It is about glances, gestures, tones of voice. It is about letting your partner know, I see you not just as the one who helps me pay the bills, but as the one who still makes my heart race. When was the last time you looked at your partner across the room and thought, wow, they're hot? If it's been a while, it's time to practice seeing them differently, because here's the truth: your partner hasn't stopped being attractive. What often changes is your gaze. And when you shift your gaze from the manager to the lover, from the parent to the mystery, something inside you shifts too. Desire is not just about them. It's about the lens through which you choose to see them. So, if you find that intimacy has faded, ask yourself, have we let our roles replace our lovers? Have we allowed responsibility to eclipse play? Have we become so efficient that we've forgotten how to be erotic? Reclaiming the lover identity is not about abandoning responsibilities. It's about balancing them. It's about remembering that you are not just co-parents or roommates or business partners. You are lovers. And when you bring that identity back into the relationship, you don't just reignite sex, you reignite life. Because at the end of the day, intimacy is not about how much you do together, but about how alive you feel together. And that aliveness only comes when you dare to look at your partner not as a role, but as a lover. So here we are. We've walked through the slow erosion of intimacy, how curiosity fades into assumption, how routine numbs us, how resentment poisons desire, how unspoken needs build silent walls, and how the roles we play overshadow the lover we once were. And yet, as heavy as these truths may feel, I want to remind you of something vital: intimacy is never permanently lost. It can be revived, renewed, and even reimagined. Intimacy is not something you either have or don't have. It is something you cultivate. It is not a possession, but a practice. And like any practice, it requires attention, creativity, and courage. If you're listening to this and feeling the weight of distance in your own relationship, I want you to take a deep breath. This is not the end of love. It is the beginning of rediscovery. Because the spark you once felt wasn't magic. It was the result of attention, of curiosity, of risk. And you can create that again. I often tell couples desire is not about adding something new, but about remembering something old. Remembering what it felt like to see your partner as a mystery. Remembering what it felt like to take a risk with them. Remembering what it felt like to choose them, not out of obligation, but out of longing. Rekindling intimacy begins with small acts. Asking your partner a question that has no agenda. Looking at them as if you were seeing them for the first time. Sharing something you've been holding back, whether it's a fear, a fantasy, or a dream. These small acts accumulate. They create a new energy, a new rhythm, a new spark. And let me say this clearly, you don't need perfect conditions for intimacy. You don't need endless time or money or youth. What you need is presence. To slow down enough to notice your partner. To listen, not to reply, but to understand. To risk saying, I miss you, even when they're lying right beside you. For men especially, this may feel daunting. Many of you were raised to believe that intimacy is about performance, about always being strong, about never showing vulnerability. But the truth is, intimacy is not about being flawless. It's about being real. It's about showing your partner not just the polished version of yourself, but the human version, the one who has fears, longings, and tenderness. That is what creates closeness. And for women, I often say, do not underestimate the power of your voice, to name what you need, to speak your desires not as demands but as invitations, to step out of the caretaker role and into the role of the lover, because when you do, you remind your partner that passion is not selfish, it is essential. The couples who thrive are not the ones who never struggle, they are the ones who keep choosing to rediscover each other. They are the ones who refuse to let routine replace play, who dare to bring honesty into silence, who hold both stability and surprise. They are the ones who understand that love is not the absence of distance, but the ongoing movement to bridge it. So I want to invite you to reflect, what is one small act you could do today to nurture intimacy? Maybe it's a question, maybe it's a glance. Maybe it's reaching out to touch your partner, not because it's expected, but because you want to remind them and yourself that the lover still lives here. And remember, this intimacy is not only about sex. It is about the way you look at each other, the way you listen, the way you risk revealing yourselves. When sex is present, it is the celebration of that intimacy. But when it is absent, the deeper work is to ask, where have we stopped seeing each other? Where have we stopped daring to be vulnerable? Where have we stopped being lovers? Let this be your reminder, it is never too late. I have seen couples rediscover passion after 20 years of silence. I have seen partners look at each other with new eyes after decades of routine. The capacity for intimacy is not bound by time, it is bound by attention. And the moment you begin to pay attention again, the moment you begin to ask, to listen, to play, intimacy begins to breathe again. So as you leave this conversation, I want to leave you with a challenge and also with a hope. The challenge is this: don't wait for your partner to make the first move. Choose to be the one who brings curiosity back. Choose to be the one who risks vulnerability. Choose to be the one who sees not just the parent, the provider, the manager, but the lover. And the hope is this, that by daring to see differently, you will feel differently. That by daring to break the silence, you will hear new music in your love. That by daring to be vulnerable, you will discover strength you didn't know you had. If this conversation has spoken to you, I would love to hear your thoughts. Share your experiences in the comments, your struggles, your victories, the ways you've kept intimacy alive, or the places where you felt it slipping away. Because when we share, we realize we're not alone. And if you found this valuable, please give it a like and subscribe. Not because it helps me, but because it helps you continue this journey, reminding you that intimacy, love, and connection are not luxuries, but the very essence of a life well lived. Here's to seeing your partner not just with familiar eyes, but with new ones. Here's to remembering that intimacy is not lost, only waiting. And here's to living love not as a memory of the past, but as a possibility of the present. Because in the end, the number one reason couples stop being intimate is not lack of love, it is lack of attention. And attention, my friends, is something you can choose. Starting